Hello and welcome to a medieval school. Tonight, we are going to travel back through the centuries to explore a world that is both familiar and surprisingly different from our own. It is a world without alarm clocks, without smartphones, without notebooks, and without school buses waiting outside in the morning. Instead, we will step into the quiet streets of medieval Europe, where education was rare, books were precious, and going to school was an opportunity available to only a small part of the population. As always, find a comfortable position, allow your mind to relax, and let the story unfold at a slow and gentle pace. There is nowhere you need to be and nothing you need to accomplish. For now, simply listen as we journey into the surprisingly ordinary world of medieval schools. Imagine that it is a cool morning sometime around the year 1200. The sun has only just begun to rise above the rooftops of a small European town. The streets are narrow and uneven. Most roads are made of packed dirt rather than stone. During wet weather they become muddy and difficult to cross. The houses around you are simple and practical. Many are built from timber and plaster, with roofs covered in straw or wooden shingles. A faint smell of wood smoke hangs in the air as families begin their daily routines. There are no electric lights glowing in windows. No engines rumble in the distance. No traffic moves through the streets. Instead, the sounds of the morning are gentle and natural. You hear the crowing of roosters. You hear the barking of a dog somewhere nearby. You hear the occasional creak of a wagon wheel. Most importantly, you hear the church bell. In medieval Europe, church bells helped organize daily life. They announced religious services, marked important events, and often served as the closest thing people had to a public clock. For many people, the ringing bell signals the beginning of another ordinary day. If you are a farmer, your day will likely involve working in the fields. If you are a craftsman, you may spend hours making shoes, tools, or clothing. If you are a merchant, you may prepare goods for the local marketplace. But for a small number of children, the day will be different. They are preparing to go to school. Today, the idea of attending school seems completely normal. Children around the world spend years learning mathematics, science, history, literature, and many other subjects. In many countries, education is expected and required. But in the medieval world, schooling was very different. Most children never attended school at all. Many families simply could not spare the time. Children often helped with farming, household work, or family businesses. Every pair of hands was valuable. A child who spent hours studying was a child who was not helping gather food, care for animals, or complete daily chores. Because of this, education was generally limited to certain groups. The sons of wealthy families might receive instruction from tutors. Children connected to churches or monasteries might have opportunities to learn reading and writing. Future priests, monks, and scholars often received formal education. For everyone else, learning usually happened through observation and experience. A young blacksmith learned by watching a blacksmith. A young baker learned by helping in a bakery. A young farmer learned by working alongside parents and relatives. Knowledge was often passed directly from one generation to the next. Even among those who attended school, the experience would feel unfamiliar to modern students. There were no colorful textbooks. There were no printed worksheets. There were no projectors, computers, or interactive whiteboards. In fact, many schools owned only a handful of books. Books were expensive objects. Each one had to be copied by hand, page after page, often by skilled scribes or monks. Creating a single book could take months of careful work. Because books required so much time and effort to produce, they were treated with great care. Students often listened far more than they read. A teacher might read aloud while students memorized information. Memory played an enormous role in medieval education. Students were expected to remember long passages, prayers, and lessons. Learning often depended upon repetition. Words were spoken again and again until they became familiar. The classroom itself could also be surprisingly simple. Imagine entering a stone building on a cold morning. The room is not brightly lit. Sunlight enters through small windows. There is little decoration. The furniture is basic. Wooden benches provide seating. The walls are plain. The air may feel chilly during winter months. Heating, if available at all, is limited. Students sit quietly as they prepare for lessons. The atmosphere is serious. Education is considered important, but it is also demanding. Teachers expect attention and discipline. Students understand that learning is a privilege not available to everyone. As the lesson begins, voices rise together in prayer. Religion is deeply connected to education throughout much of medieval Europe. Many schools are operated by religious institutions. Lessons frequently include religious texts. Students learn prayers, scripture, and church teachings alongside other subjects. For medieval people, education and faith are often closely linked. The two are difficult to separate. As the morning continues, students repeat words and phrases in Latin. To modern ears, the language sounds ancient and distant. Yet for educated people of medieval Europe, Latin serves as an important language of learning. Books are written in Latin. Religious services often use Latin. Scholars across different regions communicate through Latin. Students may spend years mastering it. For some children, these lessons are exciting. For others, they are repetitive and challenging. But regardless of personal feelings, education represents an opportunity that few possess. The knowledge gained in these classrooms can open doors to positions within the church, government, or universities. It can lead to a life very different from that of ordinary laborers. As the day progresses, lessons continue at a steady pace. The teacher speaks. Students listen. Words are repeated. Ideas are memorized. Outside, life in the medieval town continues. Merchants open shops. Farmers work fields. Artisans practice their trades. The church bell rings once again. And within the quiet classroom, young students continue their slow journey into the world of learning. For now, we will leave them there, sitting patiently on wooden benches beneath the soft light of a medieval morning. In the next part of our journey, we will explore who was actually allowed to attend school, why education remained rare, and how social class shaped the opportunities available to medieval children. But for now, simply relax and imagine the distant sound of church bells echoing across the rooftops of a medieval town, marking another peaceful day in the long history of education. Who actually went to school? As we continue our gentle journey through the world of medieval education, let us leave behind the quiet classroom for a moment and consider an important question. Who was actually allowed to attend school? Today, In much of the world, education is considered a normal part of childhood. Children from many different backgrounds attend school, study similar subjects, and spend years learning alongside one another. But if we travel back to medieval Europe, we discover a very different reality. Education was not something that everyone could access. In fact, for most people, formal schooling remained completely out of reach. To understand why, we must first understand the society of the Middle Ages. Medieval Europe was a world organized around clear social divisions. People were generally born into a particular place within society. A person's family, occupation, and wealth often determined the opportunities available throughout life. For most families, survival required constant work. The majority of people lived in rural communities. Their lives revolved around farming. Fields needed planting. Animals needed care. Wood needed gathering. Food needed preparing. Every member of the household contributed. Children were no exception. From an early age, boys and girls helped their families complete the many tasks required for daily life. A young child might watch sheep. Another might collect eggs. Others carried water from nearby wells or streams. As children grew older, their responsibilities increased. Because of these demands, many families simply had little reason to send children to school. Practical knowledge mattered far more than academic learning. Knowing how to grow crops could help a family survive. Knowing how to repair tools could be extremely valuable. Reading and writing, while useful, were not always necessary for everyday life. As a result, most medieval children learned through experience rather than formal education. Their classroom was the farm. Their teacher was daily life. They learned by watching parents, older siblings, relatives, and neighbors. Skills were passed down from one generation to the next. Yet there were exceptions. Some children did attend school. The children most likely to receive an education were those connected to wealth, religion, or positions of influence. The sons of noble families often received instruction. Nobles needed administrators, advisors, and officials capable of reading important documents. Education could prepare young men for these responsibilities. Some noble children studied at home with private tutors. Others attended schools connected to churches or cathedrals. Merchant families also recognized the value of education. As trade expanded throughout Europe, merchants increasingly relied upon records, contracts, and correspondence. The ability to read, write, and calculate numbers became useful business skills. For successful merchant families, schooling could offer practical advantages. Perhaps the greatest centers of learning, however, remained religious institutions. Monasteries and cathedral schools played a central role in education throughout much of the Middle Ages. Many students entered these schools because they were preparing for religious careers. A boy who hoped to become a priest might begin studying at a young age. He would learn prayers, religious teachings, and the Latin language. Over time, he might continue his education and eventually join the clergy. The church required educated individuals to perform many important functions. Religious services involved reading sacred texts. Church records needed to be maintained. Letters had to be written. Documents required copying. Education helped support all of these activities. As a result, churches invested considerable effort into teaching selected students. For many centuries, the Church served as one of the primary guardians of literacy in Europe. While opportunities existed for some boys, educational opportunities for girls were often much more limited. This does not mean that girls never received education. Some certainly did. Girls from wealthy families might learn reading, writing, music, or household management. Nunneries sometimes provided educational opportunities for girls and women. Certain noblewomen became highly educated by the standards of their time. However, formal schooling generally remained less accessible for girls than for boys. Social expectations often focused on preparing girls for responsibilities within the household rather than careers within the church or government. Of course, medieval Europe was not one single place. Conditions varied from region to region. Practices changed over time. The educational opportunities available in a large city might differ significantly from those found in a small rural village. Some communities offered greater access to learning than others. Yet throughout much of the Middle Ages, education remained a privilege rather than a universal experience. Imagine standing outside a cathedral school around the year 1250. Students arrive carrying very few possessions. There are no backpacks filled with textbooks, no stacks of notebooks, no electronic devices. The students entering the building represent a small and unusual group. Most children their age are elsewhere. Some are helping harvest crops. Some are tending livestock. Some are assisting craftsmen. Others are learning family trades. The children attending school belong to a minority. They are participating in an experience that many of their contemporaries will never know. Inside the school, lessons begin. Outside, everyday medieval life continues. Farmers work beneath the sun. Merchants negotiate prices. Blacksmiths shape iron. Bakers prepare bread. The vast majority of society continues its daily routines without formal education. And yet, within classrooms scattered across Europe, small groups of students are quietly preserving and transmitting knowledge. Their numbers may be limited, but their influence will eventually prove significant. Over centuries, these educational traditions will contribute to the growth of universities, scholarship, and intellectual life across Europe. For now, however, education remains something rare, something valuable, something available only to a fortunate few. As evening approaches and the shadows grow longer, our medieval students complete another day of study. Some return to religious communities. Others return to family homes. Tomorrow, lessons will begin again. Latin words will be memorized. Prayers will be recited. Books will be carefully handled. And the slow work of learning will continue. In the next part of our journey, we will step inside the earliest monastery and cathedral schools to discover where medieval education truly began, and how monks became some of the most important teachers in European history. Entering the medieval classroom. As our journey continues, let us now step through the doorway of a medieval school and see what awaited students when they arrived for their lessons. By modern standards, the classroom may seem surprisingly simple. There are no rows of brightly colored desks, no whiteboards, no clocks hanging on the walls, no maps, projectors, computers, or shelves filled with textbooks. Instead, we enter a world where nearly every object is valuable, every book is precious, and every lesson depends heavily upon listening and memory. Imagine that it is a cool autumn morning around the year 1250. The streets outside are still damp from the previous night's rain. Students make their way toward a cathedral school located near the center of town. Some arrive on foot from nearby homes. Others may have traveled from neighboring villages. A few come from wealthy families. Others hope that education will help them secure a position within the church. As they approach the school building, there is little to suggest that this place serves as a center of learning. The structure itself is modest. Built of stone and timber, it resembles many other buildings in the town. Its walls are thick. Its windows are small. The rooms inside are designed for practicality rather than comfort. Upon entering, students find themselves in a room that feels very different from a modern classroom. The floor may be made of stone or packed earth. The walls are bare. Decoration is minimal. Any available resources are devoted to learning rather than appearance. The room is illuminated mainly by sunlight entering through narrow windows. On cloudy days, the interior can feel quite dim. During winter months, the lack of natural light becomes especially noticeable. Heating is limited. Some classrooms may contain a fireplace, but fuel is expensive and not always available. Students often sit through lessons while wrapped in heavy clothing. Cold fingers and chilly feet are simply accepted as part of daily life. The furniture is basic. Wooden benches provide seating. Students may sit close together, sharing limited space. Comfort is not considered a priority. Education is viewed as serious work. Teachers expect students to focus on their studies rather than physical convenience. At the front of the room stands the teacher. Unlike modern educators who often rely on textbooks and visual materials, medieval teachers depend largely upon spoken instruction. The teacher speaks. Students listen. The teacher reads. Students repeat. The teacher explains. Students memorize. This pattern forms the foundation of many lessons. Books remain scarce and expensive. A classroom may possess only a few manuscripts. Sometimes students must share access to a single text. In other cases, only the teacher has a copy. As a result, listening carefully becomes an essential skill. Students spend long periods committing information to memory. Today, memorization is often only one part of education. In medieval schools, it is one of the most important methods of learning. A student might repeat a passage dozens of times, then repeat it again the next day, and perhaps again the day after that. Slowly, the words become familiar. Gradually, knowledge takes root. Writing materials are also very different from those used today. There are no ballpoint pens, no pencils, no spiral notebooks. Students who practice writing may use wax tablets, parchment, or scraps of prepared material. Ink is carefully conserved. Mistakes can be frustrating because resources are limited. Writing neatly is highly valued. A careless error may require significant effort to correct. The sounds inside the classroom are gentle and repetitive. Voices recite Latin phrases. Teachers read passages aloud. Students repeat lessons in unison. Occasionally the scratching of quills can be heard as writing exercises take place. The atmosphere is often quiet and disciplined. Distractions are few. There are no notifications, no ringing phones, no electronic devices competing for attention. Only the lesson and the steady rhythm of learning. The subjects taught depend largely on the purpose of the school. Religious instruction remains central. Students learn prayers and scripture. They study church teachings. Latin grammar receives considerable attention. Reading and writing are practiced carefully. Some schools introduce arithmetic. Others include elements of music, logic, or rhetoric. The goal is not to create specialists but to provide the foundation needed for further study. As the hours pass, students may become restless. After all, they are still children. A long lesson in Latin grammar can feel endless regardless of the century. Yet expectations remain strict. Attention and obedience are considered important virtues. Teachers expect respect. Students are expected to work diligently. The school day unfolds according to routines that change little from one day to the next. Predictability is valued. Order is valued. Consistency is valued. In many ways, the classroom reflects the broader medieval worldview, where tradition and established practices carry great importance. Outside, the town continues its daily activities. Merchants negotiate prices in the marketplace. Blacksmiths shape glowing iron. Farmers tend fields beyond the town walls. But inside the classroom, time seems to move more slowly. The focus remains on learning, on repetition, on patience, on the gradual accumulation of knowledge. As afternoon light streams through the windows, lessons eventually come to an end. Students gather their few belongings. Some return to family homes. Others remain within religious communities. Tomorrow they will return to the same benches, the same lessons, and the same careful routines. For medieval education is not built upon speed. It is built upon persistence. Day after day. Week after week. Year after year. And through this steady process, generations of students learn the skills that will allow knowledge to survive and spread throughout medieval Europe. In the next part of our journey, we will explore one of the most important subjects in the entire medieval curriculum, the Latin language, and discover why students spent so many hours studying a language that was rarely spoken in everyday life. Learning Latin all day. As our quiet journey through the world of medieval education continues, we arrive at a subject that occupied an enormous portion of a student's life. A subject so important that entire days could be devoted to it. A subject that connected students from England to Italy, from France to Germany, and across much of medieval Europe. That subject was Latin. To a modern student, this may seem rather strange. After all, Latin is often described as a dead language. Very few people speak it in everyday conversation. You are unlikely to hear it while shopping for groceries, riding a bus, or meeting friends for coffee. Yet during the Middle Ages, Latin was one of the most important languages a student could learn. For many medieval schools, it was not simply another subject. It was the foundation upon which nearly all other learning was built. To understand why, we must travel back many centuries. Long before the Middle Ages began, the Roman Empire stretched across vast areas of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Throughout much of this enormous territory, Latin served as a language of government, law, administration, and scholarship. Even after the Western Roman Empire disappeared, its language continued to influence educated society. Kings came and went. Borders changed. New kingdoms emerged. Yet Latin remained. Over time, ordinary people developed new languages. French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and others gradually evolved from Latin roots. But educated individuals continued to study the older language. The Church used Latin in religious services. Scholars wrote books in Latin. Important documents were recorded in Latin. Letters between learned people were often written in Latin. As a result, anyone seeking higher education needed to understand it. Imagine arriving at a cathedral school around the year 1300. You enter the classroom and take your place on a wooden bench. The teacher begins speaking. But instead of using the language spoken in the local marketplace, he begins a lesson in Latin. For a young student, this can be challenging. The language feels unfamiliar. The grammar seems complicated. The vocabulary appears endless. Yet there is no avoiding it. Latin is everywhere. Students spend hour after hour memorizing words. They read books before the printing press. As our gentle journey through the world of medieval education continues, we now turn our attention to one of the most valuable objects a student could encounter: a book. Today, books are everywhere. They sit on shelves in homes and libraries. They fill classrooms and bookstores. They can be downloaded in seconds onto phones, tablets, and computers. Most people rarely stop to consider how easily books can be obtained. But for a medieval student, a book was something very different. A book was rare. A book was expensive. A book was precious. And in many cases, a book represented months or even years of careful work. To understand why, let us imagine a world without printing presses. A world where every single book must be created entirely by hand. If someone wanted a copy of a text, there was no machine capable of producing hundreds of identical copies. Instead, a skilled scribe would sit down and write every word individually. Letter by letter. Line by line. Page after page. The process required patience, concentration, and remarkable attention to detail. Inside monasteries throughout Europe, monks often performed this work. Many monasteries contained special rooms known as scriptoria. These were places dedicated to copying manuscripts. Imagine entering one of these rooms on a quiet morning. Sunlight filters through narrow windows. Rows of desks stand along the walls. Seated at each desk is a monk carefully bending over a manuscript. The room is almost silent. Only the faint scratching of quills can be heard. Each monk concentrates on reproducing a text as accurately as possible. A single mistake may require time-consuming corrections. Accuracy matters. The goal is preservation. The monks are not simply making books. They are helping knowledge survive. The materials used to create these manuscripts are valuable in themselves. Before paper became widely available in Europe, many books were written on parchment. Parchment was made from specially prepared animal skins. Producing it required considerable labor. The skins had to be cleaned, stretched, dried, and treated carefully before they could be used for writing. As a result, even blank pages represented a significant investment. Nothing was wasted. Ink also required preparation. Pens were often made from bird feathers, known as quills. Writers trimmed the ends carefully to create writing points. The process demanded skill and practice. A poorly prepared quill could make writing difficult. A well-made quill became an essential tool for scholars and scribes. Because books were so costly, many schools possessed only a small collection. Some schools owned just a handful of important manuscripts. A teacher might have access to a text that students themselves never touched. Instead, the teacher would read aloud while students listened and memorized. This is one reason memory remains such an important part of medieval education. When books are scarce, listening becomes extremely valuable. Imagine a classroom where 20 students gather around a single manuscript. Today, such a situation would seem unusual. Yet, in the Middle Ages, it could be perfectly normal. The teacher opens the manuscript carefully. Students lean forward. Every page matters. Every line matters. The book itself may be one of the most valuable objects in the entire building. Some manuscripts are simple and practical. Others are beautifully decorated. Talented artists known as illuminators create elaborate illustrations, colorful borders, and decorative letters. Gold leaf may be added to certain pages. Bright pigments transform ordinary text into works of art. These illuminated manuscripts are among the most beautiful books ever produced. Yet they require even more time and effort to create. Months may pass before a single volume is completed. Sometimes years. For medieval students, books often inspire a sense of respect. A manuscript is not merely a learning tool. It is a treasure. It represents knowledge gathered across generations. It represents countless hours of labor. And it connects students to people who lived centuries before them. Within its pages may be religious teachings, historical accounts, philosophical ideas, scientific observations, or literary works. Every manuscript opens a small window into another world. Many books copied during the Middle Ages contain works that originated in ancient Greece and Rome. Although centuries have passed since those civilizations flourished, their ideas continue to survive through careful copying. Monks and scholars preserve texts that might otherwise disappear forever. Without these efforts, much ancient knowledge could have been lost. The medieval classroom therefore becomes part of a much larger story. A teacher reads from a manuscript. Students learn from the teacher. Some students later become teachers themselves. Knowledge passes from one generation to the next. Quietly. Slowly. Patiently. The process may not seem dramatic. There are no sudden breakthroughs. No flashing lights. No grand announcements. Instead, there is only the steady work of preservation. A book is copied. A lesson is taught. A student learns. And the chain continues. As the afternoon sun begins to sink lower in the sky, the teacher carefully closes the manuscript. The lesson ends. Students rise from their benches. The precious book is returned to its safe place. Perhaps it will be used again tomorrow. Perhaps it has already served generations of students. Perhaps it will continue serving generations yet to come. Outside, evening approaches. The marketplace grows quieter. Shadows lengthen across narrow streets. Church bells echo softly through the town. And within monastery libraries and cathedral schools, manuscripts rest quietly on shelves, waiting for the next day's lessons to begin. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the teachers of medieval schools, the rules they enforced, and the strict discipline that shaped the daily lives of students throughout the Middle Ages. Teachers and discipline in medieval schools. As our peaceful journey through the history of medieval education continues, we now arrive at a topic that many students, both past and present, may find familiar. Teachers. And along with teachers, the rules they expected students to follow. Every school requires some degree of order. Without it, lessons become difficult. Students become distracted. Learning becomes challenging. This was true in medieval Europe just as it is today. Yet the relationship between teachers and students often looked quite different from what we might expect in a modern classroom. To understand why, let us once again step into a medieval school. Imagine a quiet morning around the year 1300. The students have gathered inside a cold stone classroom. Wooden benches are arranged in neat rows. Sunlight filters through narrow windows. A manuscript rests upon a table at the front of the room. The teacher enters. Almost immediately, the atmosphere changes. Conversations stop. Students sit upright. Attention shifts toward the front of the room. Respect for authority is considered extremely important. In medieval society, people generally lived within clear hierarchies. Kings ruled over nobles. Nobles governed lands. Religious leaders guided spiritual life. Parents directed households. Teachers supervised students. Obedience was often viewed as a virtue. Questioning authority was far less common than it is in many modern educational systems. As a result, teachers possessed considerable influence within the classroom. Their role extended beyond simply sharing information. They were expected to shape character, encourage discipline, and guide moral behavior. A successful teacher was not merely knowledgeable. He was also capable of maintaining order. Most medieval teachers were connected to religious institutions. Many were priests, monks, or church officials. Their education had required years of study. They had spent countless hours learning Latin, reading religious texts, and mastering the subjects they taught. Because educated individuals were relatively rare, teachers often enjoyed significant respect within their communities. Students recognized that their instructors possessed knowledge unavailable to most people. This made the teacher's position both important and influential. The daily routine of a medieval classroom was carefully structured. Lessons followed established patterns. Students recited material. Teachers corrected mistakes. Texts were read aloud. Questions were sometimes asked. But much of the learning process depended upon repetition and careful attention. A student who listened closely could make steady progress. A student who became distracted might quickly fall behind. Naturally, children remained children regardless of the century. Some students daydreamed. Some whispered to friends. Some struggled to focus on lengthy lessons. Others simply grew tired after hours of study. Teachers therefore developed methods to maintain discipline. Many of these methods would seem strict by modern standards. In medieval schools, discipline was often viewed as an essential part of education. The belief was simple. A disciplined student became a disciplined adult. Therefore, correcting undesirable behavior was considered important. When students arrived late, failed to complete assignments, or disrupted lessons, consequences often followed. These consequences varied from place to place. Some teachers relied on stern warnings. Others assigned additional work. Religious instruction sometimes emphasized reflection and self-improvement. Yet physical punishment was also common in many medieval schools. Today, Such practices are widely restricted or prohibited in many countries. But during the Middle Ages, they were generally accepted as part of education. Teachers and parents often believed that physical discipline encouraged obedience and good habits. From a modern perspective, these methods may seem harsh. However, they reflected broader attitudes within medieval society. Discipline was not limited to schools. Apprentices, servants, soldiers, and even members of religious communities lived under strict rules and expectations. The classroom reflected these larger cultural values. Fortunately, not every school day revolved around punishment. Most students spent the majority of their time engaged in ordinary learning activities. They practiced reading. They memorized Latin grammar. They copied passages. They listened to lessons. Teachers devoted much of their energy to helping students understand increasingly difficult material. Indeed, many teachers genuinely cared about their students' success. After all, teaching was demanding work. A teacher might spend years guiding students through complex subjects. Watching a student progress from basic reading to advanced study could be deeply rewarding. Imagine a teacher near the end of a long day. The classroom has grown quiet. The final lesson has been completed. Students gather their few belongings. Some leave eagerly. Others remain behind to ask questions. The teacher watches them depart one by one. Perhaps among them is a future priest. Perhaps a scholar. Perhaps a university student who will continue studying for many years. The teacher cannot know for certain. Yet each lesson contributes to possibilities that may unfold far into the future. In many ways, medieval teachers served as bridges between generations. They inherited knowledge from those who taught before them. They passed that knowledge onward to new students. The process continued year after year. Quietly. Patiently. Without great fanfare. The teacher's work was rarely glamorous. Most days consisted of familiar routines. The same lessons. The same corrections. The same repeated exercises. Yet through these ordinary efforts, learning survived. Books were understood. Languages were preserved. Ideas continued to travel across centuries. As evening settles over the town, the classroom empties completely. The benches stand silent. The manuscripts are carefully stored away. The teacher prepares for tomorrow's lessons. Outside, church bells ring softly in the fading light. The streets grow calmer. And another ordinary school day in medieval Europe comes to an end. In the next part of our journey, we will leave the classroom behind and explore what happened after lessons ended, discovering the daily lives, chores, responsibilities, and routines that filled the hours of medieval students outside of school. Life outside the classroom. As our quiet exploration of medieval education continues, let us now leave the classroom behind for a while. The lessons are finished. The manuscripts have been carefully put away. The teacher has dismissed the students. The day's formal education has come to an end. But for medieval children, learning was only one small part of life. Outside the school walls, another world awaited them. A world filled with responsibilities, routines, family obligations, and ordinary tasks that occupied most of their time. In fact, for many students, the hours spent outside the classroom were just as important as the lessons they attended. Imagine a student leaving a cathedral school in the late afternoon. The sun hangs low above the rooftops. church bells echo through the town. Merchants are beginning to close their stalls in the marketplace. The busy sounds of the day gradually soften. As the student walks home, he passes blacksmiths finishing their work. He passes bakers removing loaves from ovens. He passes craftsmen sweeping workshops before evening arrives. The town itself seems to be settling down after another ordinary day. Unlike modern students, medieval children often had little free time. Many responsibilities awaited them at home. Even students fortunate enough to attend school were usually expected to contribute to family life. A boy might help care for animals. He might gather firewood. He might assist with carrying water. He might help repair tools or perform other household tasks. These chores were not considered unusual. They were simply part of daily life. Every member of the household was expected to help. Life in medieval Europe required constant effort. There were no washing machines, no refrigerators, no vacuum cleaners, no electric lights. Countless tasks that are now completed quickly either required manual labor or had to be done entirely by hand. Food preparation alone could consume many hours. Bread needed baking. Water needed carrying. Fires needed maintaining. Clothing required cleaning and repair. For families living in rural areas, the demands could be even greater. Imagine a student returning not to a town house but to a farm. The fields stretch into the distance. Animals require attention. Fences need maintenance. Crops must be monitored. Depending on the season, there may be planting, harvesting, or countless other tasks waiting to be completed. Even after spending part of the day learning, the student may still spend several hours helping the family before evening arrives. In this way, education and work often existed side by side. Neither completely replaced the other. For students connected to monasteries, daily life followed a different rhythm. Monastic communities operated according to carefully structured schedules. Prayer, study, work, and rest were all assigned specific times. The ringing of bells marked the passing hours. Students living within these communities experienced highly organized routines. After lessons ended, they might assist with simple duties around the monastery. Some worked in gardens. Others helped maintain buildings. Some copied texts or assisted older monks with various tasks. Life was disciplined but predictable. Every activity had its place within the daily schedule. Religion also remained an important part of life outside the classroom. Throughout medieval Europe, religious practices shaped daily routines. Families attended church services. Religious holidays marked the calendar. Prayers were often said at regular intervals throughout the day. For many students, the lessons learned at school continued through religious activities at home and within the community. The connection between education and faith remained strong. Of course, children still found moments for enjoyment. Although medieval childhood differed greatly from modern childhood, young people still enjoyed games and recreation when opportunities arose. Simple toys existed. Children played outdoor games. They ran, explored, and spent time with friends. Many forms of entertainment required little equipment and relied mainly upon imagination. A stick could become a sword. A field could become an entire kingdom. Human creativity required no special technology. As evening approaches, families gather together. The setting sun gradually disappears below the horizon. Without electric lighting, darkness arrives differently than it does today. Homes become illuminated by candles, oil lamps, or the glow of a fireplace. The amount of available light is limited. Activities naturally slow down. People often go to sleep earlier than many modern individuals. The day has been long. Work began early. Tomorrow will bring another full schedule. Imagine our medieval students sitting near the warmth of a fire. Perhaps a parent repairs clothing nearby. Perhaps younger siblings listen to stories. Perhaps the family discusses events from the day. Outside, the town grows quiet. Most businesses have closed. The marketplace is empty. Only occasional footsteps disturb the evening silence. Eventually, it is time for sleep. The student settles onto a simple bed. Tomorrow may include another school lesson, another Latin exercise, another day of chores and responsibilities. The routine will continue much as it did today, and much as it did yesterday. In many ways, medieval life was built upon repetition. The same seasons returned year after year. The same tasks repeated week after week. The same responsibilities passed from one generation to the next. Yet within these ordinary routines, people built families, communities, and traditions that shaped the world around them. As night deepens across the medieval countryside, our student drifts into sleep. The classroom feels far away now. The day's lessons are finished. The chores are complete. The church bells have fallen silent. Only the quiet sounds of the evening remain. And somewhere beneath the stars of medieval Europe, another ordinary day comes gently to an end. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the birth of Europe's first universities and discover how a small number of medieval students continued their education far beyond the classroom, entering a world of scholars, debates, and higher learning. The birth of medieval universities. As our sleepy journey through the history of medieval education continues, we now arrive at one of the most important developments in the entire story: the rise of the university. Today, universities are found all over the world. They educate millions of students. They conduct research. They preserve knowledge. They train professionals in countless fields. For many people, attending a university is considered a natural continuation of education. But during the Middle Ages, universities were something entirely new. They began as small communities of teachers and students who gathered together in search of knowledge. And from these humble beginnings, some of the world's most famous institutions would eventually emerge. Let us imagine that it is the year 1250. A young student has already spent years learning Latin. He has studied religious texts. He has practiced grammar. He has memorized countless lessons. Now he hopes to continue his education. To do so, he must travel. Unlike modern universities with sprawling campuses and purpose-built lecture halls, early universities often consisted of ordinary buildings scattered throughout towns and cities. Students rented rooms. Teachers gave lessons wherever suitable space could be found. The university was less a place and more a community of scholars. One of the earliest and most famous centers of learning was University of Bologna. Founded in medieval Italy, it became known for the study of law. Students traveled from many regions to attend lectures and learn from respected teachers. Another important center was University of Paris. It gained a reputation for theology, philosophy, and religious scholarship. Farther west, University of Oxford developed into one of Europe's leading centers of learning. Although these institutions would later become famous around the world, their beginnings were often quite modest. Imagine arriving in a university town after a long journey. The roads have been rough. The weather has been unpredictable. Travel has taken days or perhaps weeks. Finally, church towers appear on the horizon. The town comes into view. Its streets are crowded with merchants, craftsmen, pilgrims, and students. Many of the students are young men far from home for the first time. Some arrive with limited resources. Others come from wealthy families. Yet all share a common goal. They wish to learn. Daily life at a medieval university differs from life at earlier schools. The students are older. The subjects are more advanced. The expectations are higher. Latin remains the language of instruction. A student unable to understand Latin would struggle to follow lectures. As a result, years of preparation are required before university study becomes possible. The curriculum focuses on a group of subjects often known as the liberal arts. Students study grammar. They study rhetoric, the art of effective speaking and writing. They study logic, which helps them evaluate arguments and ideas. They also learn arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. These subjects are considered the foundation of higher learning. Only after mastering them can students move on to more specialized fields. For some students, this means studying law. For others, medicine. For many, theology becomes the ultimate goal. Theology, the study of religious belief and doctrine, is widely regarded as one of the most prestigious subjects available. A typical university day begins early. Students gather for lectures. A teacher reads from an important text. The students listen carefully and take notes, when possible. Books remain expensive. Therefore, lectures often serve as a primary source of information. The teacher may pause to explain difficult passages. Questions may be discussed. Arguments may be examined. Learning remains heavily dependent upon listening and memory. One feature of medieval universities is especially interesting. Debates play an important role. Students are encouraged to examine ideas carefully. Teachers present arguments. Students consider objections. Different viewpoints are discussed. These debates can become quite detailed. Sometimes they continue for hours. To modern observers, the subjects may seem highly specialized. Yet for medieval scholars, these discussions represent serious intellectual work. University life is not always easy. Students must find housing. They must manage expenses. They must balance study with daily responsibilities. Many live in modest conditions. Some struggle financially. Others miss their families and homes. Yet despite these challenges, universities continue to attract students from across Europe. The opportunity to learn remains powerful. As evening approaches, lectures end. Students leave classrooms and walk through narrow streets. Some review notes. Others discuss lessons with friends. A few prepare for examinations. Candles burn late into the night as scholars continue reading and studying. The atmosphere is quiet but determined. Knowledge remains the goal. Over time, universities become increasingly influential. They produce lawyers who help govern kingdoms. They educate priests who guide religious communities. They train physicians who care for the sick. They preserve ideas that shape future generations. What began as small gatherings of students and teachers gradually develops into institutions that will endure for centuries. Yet if we look closely, the university still shares much with the medieval schools we have already visited. Students continue to memorize information. Teachers continue to read texts aloud. Latin continues to dominate academic life. And learning remains a slow, patient process. Day after day. Lecture after lecture. Book after book. As darkness settles over the university town, church bells ring softly across the rooftops. Students return to their lodgings. Candles flicker behind small windows. The streets grow quiet. Another day of learning has come to an end. And somewhere among these scholars may be individuals whose ideas will influence generations yet to come. In the final part of our journey, we will reflect upon how medieval education gradually transformed over the centuries and how these humble schools helped lay the foundations for the educational systems we know today. A quiet reflection on medieval learning. As our long and gentle journey through the world of medieval schools draws toward its conclusion, let us take a few moments to reflect upon everything we have discovered. We began our journey in a small medieval town. We listened to church bells ringing through narrow streets. We followed students as they made their way to school. We stepped inside simple classrooms illuminated by sunlight and candles. We listened to lessons conducted in Latin. We watched teachers guide their students through long hours of memorization and study. And we explored the monasteries, cathedral schools, and universities that preserve knowledge across generations. At first glance, the world of medieval education may seem very distant from our own. Modern students carry backpacks filled with books. They use computers and tablets. They access information almost instantly. Schools are heated, illuminated, and connected to vast networks of knowledge. The medieval classroom appears simple by comparison. Yet beneath these differences, certain similarities remain surprisingly familiar. Students still learn from teachers. Teachers still pass knowledge from one generation to the next. Schools continue to serve as places where curiosity, discipline, and learning come together. The methods may have changed. The tools may have changed. But the fundamental purpose of education remains remarkably similar. Throughout much of the Middle Ages, education was available only to a relatively small number of people. Most children spent their days helping families, learning trades, and contributing to daily survival. Only a fortunate minority received formal schooling. Yet over the centuries, this situation gradually began to change. Cities expanded. Trade increased. Governments became more complex. The demand for educated individuals slowly grew. Merchants needed people who could keep records. Churches required literate clergy. Kings required administrators. Universities required students. As these needs increased, educational opportunities gradually expanded. The process was slow. Often very slow. Generations passed before significant changes became visible. A child attending school in the year 1000 might have found many similarities with a child attending school in the year 1200. Likewise, a student in 1200 might have recognized many familiar features in a classroom of 1400. Change occurred quietly, almost invisibly. Yet it was happening. New books appeared. New schools opened. Universities attracted increasing numbers of students. Ideas traveled farther than before. Knowledge became more widely available. One of the most important developments arrived toward the end of the medieval period: the invention of the printing press. For centuries, books had been copied entirely by hand. Creating a single manuscript required tremendous effort. But printing allowed texts to be reproduced far more quickly. Books became less expensive. Libraries grew. Students gained access to resources that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. The impact was enormous. Education slowly became easier to obtain. Knowledge spread more rapidly. The foundations of the modern educational world began to emerge. Yet despite these transformations, the contributions of medieval schools should not be forgotten. The monks who copied manuscripts, the teachers who taught Latin grammar, the students who spent long hours memorizing lessons, the scholars who debated ideas in early universities, all played a role in preserving and transmitting knowledge. Without their efforts, countless texts and traditions might have disappeared. The story of medieval education is therefore not a story of grand battles or famous rulers. It is a story of ordinary people doing quiet work. A monk carefully copying a page. A teacher explaining a difficult passage. A student practicing vocabulary. A scholar reading by candlelight. Small actions repeated day after day. Year after year. Century after century. And through these ordinary efforts, knowledge survived. As we imagine the medieval world one final time, let us return to that small classroom we visited earlier. The wooden benches remain. The stone walls stand silent. A manuscript rests upon a table. Sunlight enters through a narrow window. A teacher reads from a text. Students listen carefully. Outside, life continues as it always has. Merchants trade goods. Farmers work fields. Church bells mark the passing hours. The classroom itself seems ordinary. Yet within its walls, something remarkable is taking place. Knowledge is moving from one mind to another, from one generation to the next, from the past into the future. The students do not know what the world will become. They cannot imagine modern schools, libraries, universities, or digital technology. Yet in their own quiet way, they are helping build the foundations upon which those future achievements will stand. And so, as evening settles over medieval Europe one final time, the school day comes to an end. The students gather their belongings. The teacher closes the manuscript. The classroom grows quiet. Outside, the last light of day fades beyond distant rooftops. Candles begin to glow in windows. The sounds of the town gradually soften. Night spreads across fields, villages, monasteries, and cities. The bells ring one final time. And our journey through the boring history of medieval schools gently comes to a close. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful exploration of the Middle Ages. And wherever you may be, I hope that the quiet rhythms of medieval learning have helped bring a sense of calm, comfort, and rest. Good night.